Oh,
This
really?
conference will now be recorded.
Sounds like
Oh, I know.
may know by experience.
I know a lot, but I don't do.
You have bail money? Because you're gonna need it.
No. You
Yeah.
probably was sitting up at the Twister or at Jams one time with Chief and Mike Webb. I said, I got an 8mm Mauser from my backyard. I could get one.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 1 on the agenda is consider approval of consent agenda items.
Well, I make a motion, we approve consent agenda items.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Bishop,
Yes.
Malott,
Abstain.
Shriver,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Man, I need to go to the casino. I'm gonna call on them.
Item number 2, requests or comments from the public. Just a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes. When you get toward the end, I'll hold up this sign to remind you that your time's coming to a close. Please start with stating your name and address.
Ryan Parker, 1040 Edwardsville. So the wife and I moved here to Edwardsville first part of 2021, and so here we are now at the end of 2022. We've been embedding ourselves into the community, planning a church, remodeling a home, just constantly, trying to help families out in need in the area, and we've really loved becoming a part of this community and are glad that we moved here from I'll let that one be. But I want to say I really appreciate the hard work that Mayor Cahar has done. The UPOC I thought was a big deal, but even more so this recent ARPA, to take the time to work that so hard with the unified government. And despite everything else that happened with that and maybe should have happened or didn't happen, I just wanted to publicly give you a big kudos for all of your hard work on that and getting them to release some of that money to this community. So with that, I'm done. But thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. No others. We'll move on to item number 3. Here, presentation regarding the goDotte Wyandotte County Strategic Mobility Plan from Wyandotte County Planning and Urban Design.
Well, we have a presenter this evening, so I will let her introduce herself and present the plan. Just again, a reminder, this is a presentation. Some of you all may or may not have seen this in other venues. This is something we have been working on with the Unified Government Planning Department for some time. It was funded through PSP planning, and I said this before, we were engaged from before it was even submitted for PSP planning grants through the entire process. So again, kind of a summary again tonight. And, I'm sure I'll have some questions and happy to turn it over. Go ahead, introductions.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Mayor and council members. My name is Alyssa Marcy. I'm the long range planner from the UG's Planning and Urban Design Department. And so tonight I'm going to give an overview of what the goDotte Strategic Mobility Plan is and why it's important for Wyandotte County and why it's also important for Edwardsville. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what the plan is. It's separated into these 4 sections. What is goDotte and why do we need it? The foundations assessment, which was done a year prior, which looks at the conditions of the transit system in Wyandotte County, which fed into the our 5-pointed strategy to address those issues and opportunities, and then finally an implementation strategy and action matrix. So just a little bit of background. This was a Planning Sustainable Places grant, and we also had 2 additional plans that were adopted on the same day in August. That was the Northeast Kankakee Heritage Trail and the Miriam Connected Corridor Plan. All were PSP grants, all were transportation focused, and both of those other 2 plans that I mentioned are incorporated into goDotte. I also wanted to preface this with while goDotte was being designed was the exact same time as the bipartisan infrastructure law. So as that was being crafted, we were also crafting goDotte. So the way that that is framed in the prioritization of projects directly feeds into goDotte. And we wanted to do that in order to create a plan and create a strategy that could access those federal funds more easily. So again, goDotte is our first ever countywide strategic mobility strategy. So previously we've had transportation strategies broken into different plans, whether that's neighborhood area-based, city-based, but this is the first time that you can actually look at a single document and see a countywide plan. And so it also represents a paradigm shift. So previously, transportation's been thought of as just moving cars from place to place, and we really wanted to break away from that. So this is about using transportation as a building block of the community and thinking about how are we moving people from place to place, not just cars from place to place. So again, this is countywide, and what we wanted to be able to mirror from the bipartisan infrastructure law was a couple of overarching points. One is that the bipartisan bill really highlights multimodal, multi-jurisdictional regional transportation planning. That's what their priorities are for that money. And so that's what goDotte reflects as well. And so in addition to that, we also wanted to think about transportation as not just sitting in a silo by itself, but as a mechanism to achieve other needs that we have in Wyandotte County. So on the right-hand side, you'll see those symbols there. You know, how can we use transportation to improve equity, public health, connectivity throughout the community, and safety. So first, we did a foundations assessment. This was done a year prior to designing goDotte. And this really looked at those issues and opportunities, the current state of transportation in Wyandotte County. And it revealed a lot of things that we already know. The first of which is this is a very car-centric county. In a way, it is overbuilt because we don't have the congestion of a metropolitan area that you would expect for all of the infrastructure that we have. And at the same time, we have approximately 5,500 households in Wyandotte County who do not have access to a car. That doesn't include people who only have access to one vehicle. And, you know, in addition, we know that we have not improved our roads. We're behind on a lot of that. And we have approximately 4,000 vehicular accidents every single year. And those include both accidents that involve pedestrians and bicyclists. So after looking at all of this information, what it really pointed to was how transportation is tied to access to opportunities in our county. And access to opportunity meaning access to jobs, healthcare, daycare, grocery stores, all of those things. And if you look at the map there on the right-hand side, what that's showing you is all of that data that we pulled during the foundations assessment. We wanted to see exactly what access looks like in the county. And so the darker the blue, the higher the access to all of those things I mentioned, right? And if you'll notice, there is one tiny square in the southeastern corner that has highest access to opportunity. Can anyone guess what that might be? That's KU Med. So everything else in the county has pretty poor access to opportunity. And so that's one of the things that we really wanted to target in this strategy. So next we move to our public engagement process. And the list that you see here just includes what happened during the process of creating goDotte. I did want to mention that this did happen during COVID, so we had a lot of different variations on how we could reach the public, but we did have a stakeholder advisory committee, which had 2 of your city employees on it. That met 3 times. We also held a municipal listening session here in Edwardsville, and that was to really talk about what are the priority projects and what are some of the issues and opportunities that you're seeing in your city. So moving forward from this, we're not stopping engagement. So one of the things that we're trying to avoid, especially given some of the changes that we've had in leadership, is that we don't just end engagement when the plan is done, right? We have to continue the engagement. So that is why I'm here today, in part, is because now if we want to actually achieve the things that we set out in this strategy, we need to continue engagement. So the next, I had mentioned that previously transportation was maybe mentioned here and there and was kind of disparate all over the county. And so what goDotte does is distills all of these planning efforts that already existed. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're taking into account all of the work that's been done and building upon that, and doing that through the lens of this bipartisan infrastructure bill, right? Which is, how can we make this multimodal, multi-jurisdictional, regional? So that diagram that you see on the left-hand side summarizes a lot of those documents well. So goDotte is an update of the 2012 Sidewalk and Trails Master Plan, which was a countywide plan that was had basically laid the blueprint for all of the trails and sidewalks that needed to be either created or improved upon. And a lot of that remains unbuilt. So it really brings that back into the forefront and improved upon it as well. The Complete Streets Ordinance was adopted by the UG in 2020. And so this is that idea of, we're not just laying down pavement anymore. When we go to fix a street, we're incorporating all the different infrastructure to accommodate for multimodal and to think about streets as a way to build out the community. We also incorporated regional plans. So that's things like Connected KC 2050, Mark's Climate Action Plan. Of course, we included the plans from the independent cities. So your comprehensive plan, the K32 plan, we had the Tri-Cities multimodal plan is in here as well. And then again, at the most granular level, sort of the neighborhood area corridor plans as well. And so next here, we created a 5-pointed strategy. So the first was safety. We really wanted to address that statistic of those 4,000 vehicular accidents every year. And if you look at that map on the right-hand side, what that is showing you is between 2016 and 2021, a 5-year period, those are all of the accidents that just involve pedestrians and bicyclists in the county. And that's both fatal and serious injury. So we want to avoid that. And so what safety first represents is moving away from the traditional approach to transportation, which is one that's assumes that people are going to stop at every stop sign, that they're going to use their turning signal, that they're not going to speed, but at the same time that, accidents are going to happen, right? So we want to move away from that to thinking, how are accidents preventable and how can we acknowledge and plan around human error? And that's where you get a lot of things like safety calming mechanisms. So the first step of the safety first pillar is the Vision Zero action plan, and that's going to address countywide how we're going to achieve this Vision Zero. And Edwardsville is a partner on that. And I will say too, we did also apply for a grant for that too, so we're waiting to hear back about the action plan. So the second pillar is Street Design 101. It is what it sounds like. It's being brilliant at the basics. I think these two photos are really representative of that. The photo on the left-hand side, not much there other than street, right? There's no sidewalks, there's no safety calming mechanisms, there's no bike lanes, so on and so forth. If you were one of those people that was part of the 5,500 household without a car, not sure how you would safely get around on a street like that. So looking at the right-hand side, that's incorporating all of that other infrastructure that's important for keeping people safe. And so we want to wrap this into that Complete Streets Ordinance that we did so that every street, when we're thinking about it, looks more like the one on the right-hand side. So the third pillar is next level transit. And if anyone has taken public transportation in this county, you probably know it's pretty abysmal. Wait times can be up to 60 minutes plus for rides. It's not very reliable. So this is just addressing the fact that we need fast and frequent public transit. And so that is 15 minutes or less. And the map on the right-hand side there, that just shows specifically in downtown corridors that different community members highlighted as frequented streets that they would want to see improvements like that on, and how that connects directly to KCMO over there. So the fourth strategy pillar is connections, and this again refers back to that sidewalks and trails master plan. So it's lifting it back up and putting that forward and trying to make sure that when we're fixing streets or creating streets that we're thinking about these other amenities too, these other modes. And the map on the right hand side, so this is an overview. This is not all of the trails that are in the plan, but essentially what that shows is if we were to actually build or connect all of the trails that we have in Wyandotte, that's what the regional connection would look like. And then lastly is investing in opportunity corridors. And so what this hits at specifically is this concept of investing rather than spending and thinking about transit as a building block. So spending in transportation is putting concrete down, filling potholes, that kind of thing. Investing is thinking about transportation as part of the community and how it's affecting it around it. So if you look at these particular corridors and you don't just think about the streets and you think about, adding all of that additional infrastructure and how that improves access and how that might convince people to stay longer or convince businesses to come, so on and so forth, you're building a whole community, not just a street. So this led to our implementation and action plan, which I recommend taking a look at. So for each of those 5 strategy pillars, there are specific projects that the community members had selected that fall into those categories. This is a list of things that we have achieved so far with goDotte. And like I said, the next thing we're doing is waiting for this Vision Zero Action Plan grant to hear back from there, as well as looking at other additional funding that we can pursue to start actually doing some of the work here. And before I finish this up, I know it's hard to read and I apologize, but I took some screenshots here of some of the specific projects that were identified for Edwardsville that are in the goDotte plan. And I can give you something that's easier to read that you can pass around. But those are things like addressing safe routes to school, working on, let's see, 98th Street, parts of Edwardsville Drive, so on and so forth. So those were things that were identified as potential projects and priorities. I do want to emphasize, though, that goDotte is not a to-do list. goDotte is a strategy for achieving federal funds, essentially, right? This is a plan. Doesn't mean everything here is going to happen. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen exactly as it's listed, right? But it's in here, so if you did decide to pursue it, you have that additional leverage. So moving from here, unified government is going to use the goDotte as the transportation arm of our comprehensive plan. But what we need to do next is to continue engagement with our independent cities, and we need to start identifying funds to pursue because there are billions and billions of dollars and that we do not want to leave on the table. So that is my presentation. I'll take any questions.
Did anyone have any questions?
What are you visioning for that? If you go back 4 or 5 slides where you had the trails, and I think this is going to be a kind of a personal concern of mine, but
Sure.
the 32 highway where you've got that trail that's going to go from wherever, anyway, all the way from the east to the west, and it goes along 32 highway. What are you visioning on that? And like, where would the location of that be? And the reason I'm bringing that up is because 32 highway is in dire need of some super repairs and maintenance and upgrading. And west of us, they're starting to do an awful lot of industrial type of stuff along the side of that highway that I think used to be called a scenic highway. And I think they're kind of taking the scenic part out of that. And as a resident that's been here forever, I don't like the vision that I'm seeing right now. It's a personal thing. But what does the goDotte have envisioned for that? If that makes any kind of sense to you.
Sure.
Well, do you want to address
No,
that?
you go ahead.
Well, what I'm saying, so remember we did the Tri-City multimodal plan.
Yes.
Which, think about it, this is kind of the bigger plan we can incorporate. So in the Tri-City plan, it envisioned that the K-32, right, I mean, there's a lot of costs associated with it, but that K-32 would utilize things such as raised medians. It would have dedicated trail systems off-road. It would have dedicated bike lanes on, they might be on the road, but they would be at dedicated bike lanes in both directions. So in the K-32 Tri-City Multimodal Plan, that was really taken from end to end. So K-32 from, I think, 57th Street to basically the Leavenworth County line. So that is probably the broad vision of the K-32. Obviously, that's not something we do in one project or two. Or
Well, I think
three.
what I'm thinking is it looks like we're going to be losing the possibilities of that vision with the way things are developing on that right now.
Hmm.
And-
Well, and again, a plan like this, relative to planning for the city. So when we have these kind of documents and plans in place, and we, so to speak, incorporate them into our comprehensive plan, when a project comes forward to the planning commission and staff is reviewing that and making information available to the planning commission and ultimately to the council, we can reference these plans and say, how does your project fit in with this concept? Is it in keeping with it? Is it, completely opposed to it? And that then becomes part of the decision-making process to say, well, this may be a great economic development for area. It's gonna bring lots of jobs and a building. But the question is, if it's generating 100 trucks a day in and out of it, and you can't put in the trail or the sidewalks or other things, you can use that as part of the decision process. It's not, well, here's our plan. If you don't follow this, it's a no, or if you follow it, it's a yes. I mean, it's a guidepost. Without it, an applicant says, well, you say you want to have this road to look like this, but I don't see anything that tells me I have this or thing. So I guess that from a vision, if you don't want industrial development on K-32 as an example, I know we've had a lot of discussions around it. I'm not saying this totally prevents that, but it becomes part of that process to say, but what do you want on K-32? Does it look more like this, where there's trails and roads and raised medians and limited cross access, or is it a 5-lane state highway whose purpose is to move traffic quickly, right? You want to have high speed, few lights, lots of lanes, because we want to get something from place A to B. I'm not saying one's better than the other. This envisions it being more of a parkway, because that's what we said in the K-32 plan. You may have other comments as to that piece of it. But
Yeah, no, I mean, that pretty much summarizes it. I was just going to say too, I think these are rough outlines too. Like you said, you can use it kind of as an accountability mechanism when it comes to planning, but also at the same time, when it, if you do want to go and implement this, when you get boots on the ground, it's going to be a very different story of how you actually structure that.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that I don't know if it was the county or the UG applied for a grant pertaining to safety. Will you tell us a little bit more about what that entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Edwardsville, all of the independent cities are part of it, not financial contributors, but will be part of it because it is countywide. So the grant is Reconnecting Communities grant. And so essentially what that would do is just to create that Vision Zero action plan. So assess, where are our high accident areas, so what are some of the causes behind these accidents? What are some of the mechanisms that we can use to, keep them from happening in the future? So we probably won't hear back about that until, I don't know, maybe March at this point. So sometime next year. But yeah, that would be a collaborative effort to address safety just from like a plan level.
Okay. So it's just not necessarily a project, but a plan.
Yeah,
That's what the grant was applying for.
exactly. Yep.
Okay.
PSP won't allow, unfortunately, and several of us have suggested maybe it should. Even when they talk about implementation, it doesn't really have a component where you can say, we're going to hire the engineer and we're going to do design work, like engineering design work, and we're going to go out and build something. But PSP doesn't really have that component to it. Where it comes into play, however, is depending on the road in the section. When we do our STP grant applications, one of the things they look at is, well, is this part of a PSP planning area? Did you look at this before planning? And if the answer is yes, obviously you get scoring criteria. Just today, through our engineering, there's a new, I wouldn't say it's new, but there's a program out kind of ties into this called the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So there's a number of federal grants out there, right? Rural highway safety, et cetera, but there's one around Highway Safety Improvement Program. And its intent is in line with what being talked about is, are there intersections on state highway systems, i.e. a K-32, that have high incidence of accidents and death? Well, we have the data. We know where those accidents occur, where, whether it's a reportable accident, right? So it's bad enough that we have to report it as a reportable accident to the state, and then it follows up for the last 5 years. So we happen to just be talking about this, quite honestly, a few days ago, right before Thanksgiving, with our engineering firm, Randy Gordon. And today he says, hey, this program just got announced, officially announced, released, and it's a grant application that'll be due in February. But again, it ties with this plan to be able to say, hey, this plan talks about safety first. Here's a grant application about intersection improvements to reduce death and injuries, right? It gives us that ability to use planning to hopefully get to dollars, real dollars, right? But without it, your chances are low. A lot of times we'll say, have you done this plan? And if the answer is no, it's like safe routes to school. The first thing you have to do is get a plan approved.
Yeah.
I mean, to get funding under safe routes to school, you have to have a safe routes to school plan adopted. This doesn't meet that. It gives the broad spectrum, but you can't go get money to build sidewalks, as an example, until you got the plan.
Mhm.
To get the plan, you got to go through, again, the mark and the process and things like that. And we have tried a few times, not recently, and weren't successful in that. But these kind of things help us provide us more information, more data.
Okay. And I had another question. You mentioned that, like, for this particular grant, that the cities aren't financial contributors, but will be part of it, so you'd benefit from it. But the concern that I'd have just for Edwardsville is when we get into the actual projects that come about because of this, when we're talking about like the enhanced bus services, or I had a picture of light rail and things like that. Those are primarily going to be Kansas City, Kansas projects. Will those be funded through Kansas City, Kansas, or are those going to be funded through the UG and our county dollars?
Right. So for the actual implementation of the project, for the, the concrete, the goal is that every entity would be a contributor to some degree, right? And so that you're having like a regional partnership to go for the funding. That's specifically what a lot of the federal funding is looking for, is having all of those entities be part of it. And one of the reasons too is to help, one, share the burden, right, of the what is it called? The match, sorry. But also to distribute the wealth, across the region. So
I think it matters to a project, right? So again, K32, I'm going to stick on K32 because it's one we know well, right? I mean, that's not a project that's going to get done in one fell swoop. Right? I mean, it just isn't. It's probably beyond any of the entity's funding capacity. But it may be, hey, you're doing a section that's mostly in Edwardsville. Well, we might be the primary financing tool in it. But as it moves to KCK or Bonner, I mean, we may be part, but at a lesser level. So say you're redoing the intersection at 435 and K32. I mean, if I go by city limits, I mean, the entire intersection is technically in Edwardsville, but the funding, the map, it may be, hey, let's look at this. We're going to go, 500 feet either side of this thing, and we're going to determine it's an equal match program or some deal. So I think by project, it'll be determined how to match it, and it may be again, I can't forget, but it's of sufficient enough county-wide benefit that the county capital improvement programs look at that versus if I'm doing something at state and, a state avenue area, it may be more of a local funded project that we wouldn't necessarily be a part of.
So if it's for downtown buses near KU Med, would Edwardsville be like, would our county dollar, not Edwardsville City, but would our county dollars be going to pay that match, or would KCK be paying that match?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that. I'm assuming that it would be KCK, but you know how people move money around.
I know. Yeah. And if you wouldn't mind just confirming that, I think that would be really valuable information for us going forward on it.
For sure.
I've been on the TTPC committee for, I think, 14 years. And this is the first time I've ever seen Wyandotte County come to a transportation plan that's county comprehensive. We've seen it from Johnson County and Cass and all the counties around over the years. But when Alyssa made the presentation a few weeks ago at TTPC, I was really excited because this lays a foundation for some great development in the future, and it coordinates the whole county. And it was nice to know that we had a couple of people that were involved in the structure, the basic structure of the plan and so forth. And so this is a very marked improvement for Wyandotte County in its future. So this was like 10 years too early to get into a whole lot of detail, and we're probably looking at a number of years before we look at any projects in it. But I'm excited because it lays a foundation. And like Mike said, when a project comes to TTPC, one of the subcommittees for funding requests, the fact that it complies and adheres to a generally accepted policy and strategy is huge in the scoring component. And so this really gives our community, our county, the ability, and really it gives us probably an opportunity we've never had before to score better on projects and to have more opportunities to share in the funds that are distributed by Mid-America Regional Council.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build off that too, I think that this is a, leveraging tool, right? Just if you can think about that, and in terms of having it be fully countywide, it is our goal that you can adopt this to make it, useful to you. And I will, suggest too with some of the other independent cities that I've spoken with, they're considering, okay, like we're going to adopt goDotte so that we can utilize it and also add XYZ projects to that, resolution too, to specify it a little more because, maybe there were some things that didn't get put in that you want to see. So.
Sure. And then you had mentioned, and I'd heard as well that we've had, especially Bradley was included from the beginning on that. And I really appreciate that the UG thought of us in the beginning instead of after the fact. But you had mentioned that there was a listening engagement and then community members that were advisors on what projects to go forward. Were there any community members or residents of Edwardsville that were included on those?
So it was mostly staff that identified the projects.
Oh.
Yep.
And then it was Bradley and someone else?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry, Zach, I didn't leave you out of that. One thing in particular, and this is just resident perspective,
Sure.
and one of the main projects up there was connecting Riverview to Turner Diagonal at 72nd.
Yep.
I have talked to hundreds of Edwardsville residents over the last 6 years, and most residents are not in favor of more connection for through streets to Kansas City, Kansas, and Edwardsville.
Okay.
And so I would just encourage, I know it's really burdensome or frustrating for staff if they're working on a project, and especially UG maybe if they're working on a project, then it gets to us, and then residents go, oh, we don't want that. And so I thought it'd probably be better for you to know up front that when I've talked to hundreds of people here in the city, they're great with K32 being that trail expansion and bike lanes and all of that. We have K32, we have I-70, we have Kansas that goes most of the way through,
Okay.
but we don't want multiple like highways through
Right.
the city. We like that more rural feel of that. And so I
Okay.
just wanted to bring that to your attention as well.
No, that's good to know. Thank you.
And I would say these things will, I mean, in their plans, I think from very good, I mean, we'll have different leadership over the next 20, 30 years. So some of these things may be there, may go away, may come back. I mean, use Kansas Avenue, I mean, until probably 10 years, 30 years ago, I think KDOT funded a study that took, Kansas Avenue from 435 to K7, right? It was on the books. It was part of the MARC transportation plan, right, for the longest time. And it was time to update the transportation improvement plan. And so there was discussions about what is the probability of that ever getting built? And when you started looking at a number of factors, going through the scout camp, going through the resort or the retreat center down there, trying to get across Mission Creek. I mean, you started looking at all of these things and it was like, that's not probable, right? And so that came off and we kind of refocused on, utilizing to some respect, Riverview, I think at the 124th or 120 over, Kansas Avenue comes in dead ends and then you go north and you hit Riverview and you come over to either 102nd or 98 and you go back south and hit Kansas Avenue, right? So we refocused and said, well, the more likely areas that we would want to use federal funding for road improvements would be those roads versus trying to build a Kansas Avenue all the way through. It just doesn't make sense, right? And it sat there on the books for 30, 40 years probably before, they finally just said, well, this isn't gonna ever get built. KDOT's never gonna fund it. We're not gonna fund it. Bonner Springs not gonna fund it. And so I think you'll see things and they may cause some concern, but again, it's a local, a lot of this still has a lot of local decisions.
Mhm.
I think earlier there was, showing again, K32 and trail systems. But where those can be valuable is as we're building, we may be building local trails, right? I say local, it's something we're doing and we're connecting the river, but we want to get up to K32 and we want to be able, how do you get walkability? I know we've talked about it a million times. How do you get walkability down to the Dollar General store or in the future past that, right? And so our trail system may connect with the bigger plan. And it won't be in this plan, but it could be in our own, we'll have our own trail plan, right? That will be more local in nature.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to be building trails going this direction and there's a county one taking the trails that direction and we never connect, right? Or quite honestly, how do you get from our trail systems in Wyandotte County into the trail systems that go into Johnson County that gets you on the the trails that go all the way across Missouri, it goes south and Kansas. I mean, there's a lot of trails. Part of this is at least recognizing at some point you got to connect to those places. Kind of like having 4 roads and they all dead end. You can't connect. They don't do much good for you. Hopefully we can use tools like this for that. I noticed they have the complete streets, that's something we need to adopt. We've not adopted. It's very, and again, when it comes to funding mechanisms, not having complete street kicks us out. Yes, it has to have certain elements to it. Yes, the UG's adopted one, Bonner Springs adopted one, but they don't look the same, right? They both have complete street policies, but their policies may be different because the locale, what they use locally may be different, right? We may have complete streets, probably wouldn't engage as much bus transit centers, right? Because that's way down the road. Might plan for a certain amount of that. I mean, 98th Street, could that become a bus corridor someday? Because you're going to go from state to K32, maybe, but today and any time in the near future, you're not going to build bus transit stations around there. But KCK, they've got a number of areas where the complete street needs to include bus transit, right? The State Avenue corridor, maybe downtown, as they move farther west, north.
Right.
So again, the plan, take it as a flexible document.
And that's why I was asking a little bit about the funding with that. I think the K32 plans in here are great. In fact, I've been talking to some people at the state level with Kansas Transportation, and they were telling me that when we're applying for funding through the state and the federal, that exactly what you guys are saying, if you get more municipalities involved, that we have a lot better chance of getting that funding. And it is desperately needed on K32, especially with the crumbling infrastructure. So I really do appreciate that. And I don't want to cut anybody off if anyone else has questions.
I did
Yeah,
have
go
one,
ahead.
just real quick. It was just an observation. Could you go back to the slide where they had all those stars all over the map? There. What do the stars represent again?
So roughly it's supposed to more like geographically represent all of the plans that were distilled into goDotte. So like for the two in Edwardsville would be the comprehensive plan and the K32 plan that we referenced, and in Bonner Springs, similar, right? The one in the middle is the tri-state or tri-city, sorry, excuse me. And then, the ones to the east are just the individual area plans.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
And is there a 4th Street plan included in that, or was that just more of a city base?
Well, the connecting Edwardsville, yes, the 4th and K32,
Yeah.
I think is incorporated in there. 98th Street, remember we did a full corridor plan of that, right? Which, the good thing is we've got funding for the first phase, and we just found out we got funding for the second phase. So we've already clicked off item 1 and 2 off.
Right.
So that's a good thing, right? But we didn't know that at the time we started this, right? So
Moving right along.
anyways, and
Yeah.
we reference these
Yes,
plans.
thank
we definitely reference them.
For sure. Thank you so much for coming out
Thank you
and
so
spending
much.
time with us, answering questions. And again, the engagement on the first end of these projects really means a lot to our city. So thank you for doing
Yeah,
that.
no, thank you.
Have a great night. Item number 4 here, KC disposal presentation related to recommended solid waste fees and consider possible action on rate adjustments for 2023.
Mayor and members of council, a little bit of housekeeping real quick. I spoke with Matt Gibson, who's our primary contact over at KC Disposal and the regional manager for this area. He is sick and was unable to make it to tonight's meeting. He did ask that I go ahead and present this material. If there are questions, that I can relay those back to him. But essentially, this is a continuation of the discussion that the council had with KC Disposal in early April. At that time, KC Disposal had come and requested an addendum to not addendum, but an amendment to the existing solid waste agreement, which would raise the per rate charge or per address charge charged to Edwardsville by KC Disposal from its current rate, which is $15.92, to about $19.70. And that was negotiated down. They allowed essentially staggering up to that point over a couple of years. So to give you a little bit of history on our partnership with Casey Disposal, we went out for bid at the end of 2020 and got responses from 4 different commercial solid waste vendors. After a review by staff and council, we selected Casey Disposal as the most affordable option. At that time, their rate to the city was $15.69. Our rate to residents was $18.25. In the original agreement, it had an automatic 1.5% rate adjustment built into the contract. So there was that each year, their rate to the city increased 1.5%. That was exercised at the beginning of 2022. So their rate to the city went from $15.69 to $15.92. We adjusted our rates to what they currently are right now at $18.70 per month. Again, we bill every other month. In April is when Casey Disposal came and asked for changes to the contract, citing different market factors that we're all familiar with at this point. Where we landed on was the addendum, which is included in the agenda material, was that they, being Casey Disposal, could at that time increase their rate to the city from $15.92 to $17.92, effective in June. Casey Disposal did not exercise that increase until October. So from June to October, they kept it at the current rate and only in October adjusted it. I couldn't say exactly why they waited. I don't know if they were waiting to see. I think at that point, market was starting to cool down a little bit. Maybe they wanted to see how things were going to play out. But in any case, it wasn't until October that they changed their rate. The decision that we made was that we wouldn't pass on any of the increased costs at that time to our customers. Instead, we would offset whatever deficiencies in the solid waste fund that might be there due to this rate change from a transfer from the sewer fund. That transfer is we still are going to need a transfer, but it's going to be less than what we thought because they took longer to implement and exercise that increase. Also included in the addendum that was approved in April was it eliminated the automatic 1.5% increase and replaced it with the clause that Casey Disposal could come back and request an up to 5% increase, citing market conditions, CPI, their own internal data, essentially providing justification for their own costs that justified the increase in costs to the city. So that's kind of where we're at now. So what this discussion right now is really only having to do with the contract between Casey Disposal and the city, not the residential rates that we charge to residents. We do a master rate ordinance in December, so there's a couple different items in that rate ordinance that we look at, not just sewer. So we're going to tackle all of that in December. So right now, this is just looking at the rate that Casey Disposal charges to the city per address in our current contract. They're exercising that option to request a 5% increase, which would increase their costs or their charge per address to the city from $15.92 to $18.81 beginning January 2023.
Is that
Yes, ma'am.
17.92 to 18.80.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. Yeah.
seven? I was going to say that seems like more than 5%.
No. Also included in the agenda material is just kind of we presented this in April as well, but essentially just a reminder of the other 3 firms who submitted where their rates were ending up when we first went out to bid in 2020, at the end of 2020, I should say. And it also collects internal data provided by Casey Disposal related to some of their fixed and materials costs, and motor oil, hydro, fuel, things like that. Pretty much everything that they need for operations other than payroll. And then also included some information showing the increase in the CPI and the PPI. So what the PPI is the producer price index. So that's essentially what producers pay in order to run their operations. That's their own cost. And what that table is showing is that between October 21 and October 2022, PPI in the solid waste industry has increased 9.9%. And the CPI, what the CPI is that's the consumer price index. So that's what consumers are paying. In the solid waste industry, that increased 3.1% for solid waste, and overall 7.7% for just overall CPI. And that's not I'm not an economist by trade, but that's not too surprising in that costs to the producer would increase, would lag behind costs to the consumer. They would incur those costs and then recoup those costs through increased charges. So that's essentially the relationship between the PPI and the CPI. And again, these ones are focused solely on that solid waste sector that the Bureau of Labor Statistics pulls out. If we were to approve this 5% increase and increase the rate from 1792 to 1881, then at that point we would be looking at the rate adjustments that we had talked about in April, likely landing around that $21 to $21.25 that we would charge to the residents. And that wouldn't be until the end of February that we introduce any new adjustments to the rates. So any adjustments to the rates, we've got, a 3-month period essentially to communicate that to the residents so we can, prep them for that, because it's not an insignificant increase. And any increase is, not welcome, but we would take that time to communicate it as best we could so people are, less of a sticker shock if that were to happen. Again, this is more of KC Disposal's presentation and request, so I can answer questions as it relates to our end of things. If you do have questions outside of this, and I will relay those to Matt and over at KC Disposal, your other option would be to move forward with this request at the 5% increase stipulated allowed for in the contract.
Just so I make sure that the numbers are there, the right thing down. Our current, not the current bill, what residents currently get, but what we're billed by KC Disposal is currently $17.92.
As of October, yes.
And the request is to $18.91, which is 5%.
$18.81, yes.
$18.81. Okay. And that would be for the next year.
That would be from, yes. So the addendum would allow them to request an up to, what their contract addendum now states is each year of the contract, they can request an up to 5% increase that would come into effect in January. So they couldn't request another increase unless they came back and asked for another addendum in 2023 that wouldn't take effect until January of 2024. And the way we kind of had it mapped out is it looked like, and this has improved some in that our delinquency rate earlier in the year was closer around that 10%, which was not very good. Brenda, our office administrator, has done some really good outreach to some of our delinquent accounts and just, staying on top of folks, which has reduced that to around between 6 and 7%, which is good. I mean, you're never going to reduce it, much lower than 5%. You're always going to have some delinquency built in there, which is part of the reason why it's not just a 1-for-1. They charge us a certain amount, we charge the same amount back. There's other costs built into the solid waste fund, delinquency, billing charges, things like postage and things like that. But yes, to answer your question, it would be for 2023. The next time the rate would be adjusted would be in 2024. And if delinquency were to hover around that 6 or 7%, then what we estimate is that with our current customer base, somewhere around that $1 per year going forward would be something that we would expect to charge the residents. So that a $1 increase from 2023 to 2024, 2024 to 2025. This would be the biggest increase, all at once. So we're kind of eating all that at the front end of it. But then going forward, if they get that 5% each year, if they're able to support that and the council supports their request, and we can keep delinquency kind of where it's at right now or a little bit better, a $1 increase from 2023 to 2024 and 2024 to 2025 is what would be expected.
I feel like 5% 1 year doesn't seem like too much, but if we could do that 5 years in a row, that's a 25% increase, which would, I don't know that we want to set a precedent that we just expect 5% raise every year.
No, and I think that's what's built into the addendum, that they need to provide that internal data that shows here are their costs over a certain amount of time that has increased, and as in addition to the larger kind of macro market level CPI, PPI for solid waste. So it is kind of a moving target when after you let it out of the gate. But part of the changes is that it's not an automatic escalator anymore. So they have to kind of go through this process at this time in the year and present their justification to the council, or at least their materials to the council that they can consider.
And could you remind me, Zach, so the request is 1881, but what would we imagine January or February that the bill would actually be per month to the resident?
To the residents, probably around either $21 minimum, probably 21, 25 is going to be where we're landing. Some of that's going to depend on $21.25, correct, yeah. Some of that, we're still kind of waiting on our November to close out and see how that's shaken out. And 'cause we like to, it's not my favorite thing to do. I understand why we do it because we want to do as much savings as we can to residents. We always play the solid waste fund the margins in there are extremely thin. We always play it really close to the chest, and which is good because that's the best way to get savings. It's a little bit, there's a higher level of uncertainty because we're kind of waiting for the last minute to see how certain months are coming in before we pull the trigger on how we think a year is going to go out, which is, we could do it. That's no problem. It's just when the margins are thin, you kind of got to wait for as much data as you can get, which pushes it off. But any change in the rates that we're going to get in that amount of time, we'd have that, 2.5 months to communicate that before the first new billing would go out at the end of February.
I think a couple of other comments, rates are important. I think we've seen our service level certainly has improved over our prior provider. They've been very responsive to us, right? I mean, they're not without any error, but they've always been very responsive to us. They've been a partner in the community and that, and other things. If you've read recently, some of their competitors are having significant problems with staffing and equipment and things of that nature. We really haven't experienced that. I mean, I think it's, I remember Prairie Village, Brooklyn Park, somewhere over there. I mean, they're going where trash isn't getting picked up for 2 weeks. I mean, they're into charging penalties, et cetera, with their providers. We really haven't had that. So, I mean, that's a plus, I think, as we look at these. And if I remember right, and they've been really, part of what we pay for out of that solid waste fund is our March to May, I think May. Our cleanup day where we bring all the dumpsters, right? So we have to cover those costs. So they provide some of those dumpsters to us free as well as some of the city services. But if I remember right, did you say they're going to be adding another?
Yes, yeah, that was discussed in April too. Yeah. So, and so essentially, this is already included in the contract addendum that was approved. So this is going to happen regardless of a rate change. But starting in 2023, they'll introduce. So we've got our May citywide cleanup, the kind of dumpster days that goes on at City Hall, which is always well attended, and then we've got a November curbside bulky item pickup. Starting in 2023, we'll introduce an August curbside pickup. So essentially, starting in May, we'll have once a quarter going forward bulky item options.
And one thing that you didn't mention that I really do appreciate is supporting an Edwardsville company.
Mm-hmm.
They're right here in Edwardsville. I think it's fantastic. One thing that if I remember, it was Councilman Scott brought up before, is our delinquent rate. In changing how we address that, because I feel like before it was going on for months and months and months, and then it was left on the rest of the community to cover that bill, which 10% is a lot, 7% is a lot. Have we tightened that up a bit? And I know that doesn't have to do with Casey. We
have tightened that up. I mean, that 10% was at the beginning of the year, and then where we're at right now, we're right around that 6%. So, I mean, the rate, if this 5% were to go into effect and we adjusted the rates to say 21, 25, that would assume that assumes a 7% delinquent rate, which we could then stomach. We could support at that kind of delinquency at that rate. And to your point, yeah, that's the more delinquency you have, the more burden you put on your neighbors to kind of foot your bill. And so that shrinking of that has been a priority over the year. And Brenda over the front office especially has done a really good job of that outreach that we need to do to shrink that up. And people are a lot more regular.
Not just shrink the amount, but the delinquency of the accounts. I think Mr. Scott was a time. So account becomes delinquent, how much time before we're we're taking steps to reach out, engage, find out, people move out, they don't pay their last bills. I mean, you're going to have some of that you're going to write off, right? But I don't know that we have numbers per se, but that time frame has shrunk in the sense of we're not waiting 3 cycles, 4 cycles, and of course the cycles used to be 3 months.
Right.
So you were 3 months and you know, and it was delinquent, and then 3 months, and then you were 6 months out sometimes for it. Doing the every other month gets us there, and I think we're reacting on those, you know, a lot sooner at that, you know, 2 or 3 month phase. It may still take 30 days for somebody, or we might get them on a payment plan where they say, yeah, I'm sorry, I got behind, you know, life things. I can do a payment plan, or some, you know, I can pay a little bit now, rest of it later. Those are still delinquent until they're paid up. But,
Right.
But I think Brenda's really, I mean, I'm not a renter every day, but I hear every day talking to somebody, it seems like, on an account, trying to work with them, find a solution.
And that's a good point about the delinquency, in that we do have delinquent accounts that are paying back their existing balance. So the account is still delinquent, and they play into that 6 or 7%, but they're making regular payments. And a lot of it is, you know, they've got a payment plan set up to where, you know, their trash bill might be, you know, the 3640 or 3740 every other month, but they're paying 70 every month for a period of time so they can help them get caught up. Now their account's still delinquent and accounts toward that delinquent percentage, but we've got, you know, a couple different payment plans with a couple different individuals that are working towards resolving all those, which is good. It's better than, we don't want to send anybody to collections. That's kind of the last thing we want to do. We want to work with folks as best we can to make sure that they're all above board and paying their way. And I think we've done a really good job this year of shoring that up. And that's going to get, you know, that's, as those accounts become not delinquent, then that delinquency rate's going to, you know, go down even more. Cases disposal, so far we've not had to, you know, lean on them too much, but they have said, you know, if you have a problem account that's just not paying, we won't just give us the address and we won't serve them. And they, I mean, they've got a pretty robust system where they can identify accounts that we give them, and then they just won't get service. They'll continue to get charged, but they won't get service. So far, we've not had to utilize that. And to the city manager's earlier point about consistency, you know, this is as consistent as a level of services that I've seen, especially out of the other 3 firms that submitted proposals. One of them we have a history with, and we weren't that interested in returning to. And another is one of the firms that Michael mentioned that keep popping up in the news that's having issues with lack of weeks without collection and not being able to fill staff. So it's, to say nothing of the fact that in 2020, those rates, you know, the charge to the city for firm 1 was 2020, firm 2, 2195, firm 3, 2475. You know, that's significantly higher than the 1881 that's being requested now, and that was 2 years ago. So, you know, I don't want to, again, this is Casey Disposal's contract, so I'm not pitch hitting for Casey Disposal, but just from a mathematical perspective, my job is to go out and try and find the best value to us. And at this point, I think Casey Disposal still offers that.
Yeah, Zach, that's what I was going to comment on is the RFPs back in 2020, even with the 5% increase that they're proposing, it's still cheaper than the 3 firms that we got back in 2020. You know, the increase, you know, I think we all feel about the same about a 5% increase, but it's almost like a necessary evil, especially with the hardship of labor and different things. And our quality of our trash and recycle has stepped up. And I definitely applaud your guys' efforts and staff's effort on the delinquent accounts. You know, from 10% to 6% is great. And I know you said you guys where we can stomach anything below 7, but I would push harder to get it below 5 and keep it there. And I think now that we have good staff with Brenda and you know, making those phone calls and working with citizens that do get behind for whatever reason, which we understand, and reaching out to them sooner than later versus 3 months or 6 months out, just give them a heads up that we're willing to work with them, I think is the right step that we need to do for them. So,
And I think, I mean, consistency is good on that side of things too. Brenda's only been with us for a little bit more than 6 months, and before that, her previous person had only been here for 6 months. So some stability on our side from an office staffing standpoint is going to help out a lot in making sure that outreach that we've been making stays consistent, and that we keep getting that consistent return on the billing that we do.
But I would suggest though, leaning on KC Disposal, if we get a citizen that is not responding to our efforts, instead of continuing that service and continuing that bill getting greater, let's lean on KC Disposal with their advice and, heaven forbid, pull their dumpster or do whatever we got to do. But we want them to communicate with us on what's going on and how can we help them and how can they get that payment made up for it.
Of course.
This is a little bit of a sidebar, but I heard a public service announcement a week or so ago on the radio, and I'm a strong believer that words mean things. And it's the first time I'd ever heard recycling or the word clean added to recycling in a public service announcement. And it drew me back to a conversation we had with Definabaugh about 4 or 5 years ago, when they came to us for a rate increase because they were losing money in recycling. And the only country really taking recycling right now is China. And they want 98% cleanliness on all recycling. And I'll be honest with you, I stopped recycling that day because I figured I'm going to spend more money and waste more resources cleaning up my recycling to make it 98% clean than we would ever recover for the planet by sending the trash over to China and then having it rejected and have the barge come back and get dumped in the ocean. So I think that's another cost. I don't think there's going to be too many trash companies really have the courage to say the words about being really concerned about recycling in general. But it's at this point in time, and other articles I've read, it appears to be somewhat counterproductive in some ways. And so I think we ought to keep our eyes on that, because Definabaugh 3 or 4 or 5 years ago was really feeling the heat from that. And that's one of the reasons they used us coming for a rate increase.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't give it to them, but that was one of their rationale, and that's supported by other articles.
I think that plays into that PPI graph that's in the that's included in the agenda materials. That's cost to them that has grown faster than the cost that they have been billing to their customers. And a lot of that is because, Michael and I were talking, those are, you've got communities who are locked into 10-year contracts with firms. You've got communities who are doing their own solid waste service that their costs are going up. They just augment it with property taxes or things like that. So I do feel, kind of to your point about this larger reckoning in the solid waste industry, I do feel that here in the next 5 years or so, there will be pretty significant shakeups in kind of what the metro, just if we're talking locally, is going to be experiencing from a billing standpoint, and then from a larger, service level, is what is it worth to the vendors? What services are worth it to the vendors to continue to provide to it? I think recycling is probably actually, it's going to be a pretty major component whenever Wyandotte County pulls the trigger on any of their solid waste management plan recommendations. When that is going to happen, I couldn't say. But at some point in the next year, at least on the Wyandotte County side, I imagine some significant changes on that front.
Just ecologically, it doesn't make sense to me to spend all that diesel fuel to send our trash over to China only to have it rejected because it's not 98% clean. And then a lot of it's not making it back here. And so I think it's time for us to really think, instead of just do emotional recycling as saving the planet. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's killing the planet. So that needs to be a discussion that we keep in the back of our mind for the future.
Zach, I'd also like to see a breakdown of what the recycling does cost each citizen, if you will, because I know Firm 1 and Firm 3 had them in 2020 when we did the RFPs. And I'm sure we have that with KC Disposal on what that recycle cost is. But, I don't know if it's too late for next year's, this 5% increase they're looking at, but maybe for 2024, midsummer next year, we do a survey on recycling for our city and just find out what that popularity or what that vote would be, whether we continue it or whether we do it every other week in lieu of that 5% increase.
it's probably worth kicking the tires on that. And some of this, we've kind of had some of those discussions with Casey Disposal in April about, what if we moved to it? And from their standpoint at that time, it was, they didn't see a significant cost savings in moving from once a week because their trucks are still out, and running those routes anyway. So we could, that's not to say we can't open the hood on that and see where things are shaking out in 2024. And I think it would be worth our time to do that. I agree.
If I remember right, so we participate with the, goDotte. So every county has to have a waste management plan, right? And Zach is our contact on that. If I recall right, our recycling rates were significantly higher than the rest of the county and was higher than like metro averages or national averages.
It's higher than, ours were higher. They measured it by diversion rate. So the amount of materials that you were diverting away from the landfill through your recycling. Edwardsville's, I want to say, was at 18%, which was significantly higher than the rest of the county because specifically of our level of our weekly 65-gallon regular pickup, which the rest of the county, they've got weekly service, but it's the smaller totes and it's a little bit scattered.
Yeah.
I remember that discussion that the every other week was a little bit tricky for him, but along with Councilman Adams' point, if we're recycling to just make ourselves feel better and it's not actually helping anything and it is costing more, it might be worth looking at. Some people might prefer 2 trash bins, do a trash and recycling. It might save the residents money and it might save KC Disposal money. And so it might be something just to look into, like the facts behind it. Are we doing it just to make, and my recycling's usually more full than my trash can.
Mm-hmm.
But but my trash can's also full enough that I can't put all the recycling in it. So if it's not doing any good and I just have 2 bins, maybe that's the way to go. But I do think that is,
and we'd be coming up at that
we're
at that half-year point in our 5-year contract in the middle of next year anyway. So that would probably be a worthwhile exercise just to see where some of these other variables are standing.
I think some of this concept around clean and not clean also is, and this was our argument with waste management. They talked about, well, we need this increase because, we've got this problem with unclean recycling. And our point was, and what are you doing? What are you doing to educate people? I mean,
right.
Oh, I got a cardboard box that a pizza came in. I throw it in my recycling bin. I say, no, you can't put that in your recycling. But if you don't educate people to that, then you keep having those problems. Right? Or I'm putting things into my recycling that I shouldn't, or they don't take number 7, 8, and 9 recycles or whatever. Right? But they were doing nothing, zero, to educate people on proper recycling, what should or shouldn't go in the bins. And I think if you look along, on a national level, where there's better education around those things, that there's better quality recycling and probably higher levels of recycling. But when you just tell people, there's the garbage can and there's a recycling can, and we put a sticker on top of it, and it says cardboard, I go, okay, all cardboard can go in. Well, maybe, not, or, I had a box that came with a bunch of those peanuts in it. I just tossed the whole thing in the recycling container. Well, the box is fine, but the peanuts aren't fine. Yeah, it's a hassle. But I mean, if we're not going to educate people on any of it.
Well, to that point, why don't we propose that with this price increase, there's at least 2 designated communications from KC Disposal about educating on recycling. And I would make the motion to approve the increase to, it's 1881, right?
Do you say authorize or approve the 5% increase as per the
Approve the
addendum?
5% increase with the stipulation that Kansas City or KC Disposal, but twice during the next 12 months, sends out recycling education communication via mail, not on their website or not on via the USPS mail.
So the motion would be to authorize the 5% increase per the contract addendum, with the stipulation that it also comes with additional, but at least 2 mailer
Training.
outreach regarding
Details.
recycling, best practice recycling. I think I could pass that on to case disposal. I don't think they'll have a problem with that.
The other, when we had waste management though, the top of the recycle can, it had pictures, what to do, take and what they couldn't take. Yeah.
It explains pretty well on the ones we have now.
Oh, then.
After it rained on it 3 times, it was gone. I'll
A
second
second.
the motion.
Yeah, that was-
Garrett is the second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Bishop,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Thank you. And while you're up there, Zach, I know that I brought this up before, but I feel like instead of bringing it up in December when we talk about rate increase or January, if we could motivate people to go paperless on their trash billing, because I know that postage costs
Yes.
the city
Mhm.
money. This would be a great opportunity to say save $5 on your next bill. So
Mhm.
it gives
So
them
what,
a few months to make up that difference if they go paperless.
one of the strategies that we've been talking about, and a lot of these are going to be, this is through lack of office stability in terms of people at desks, we've not been able to implement some of these, but with Brenda kind of really getting her fingers in the dirt, what we've been starting to do, or we will start to do, is whenever we have new customers, kind of offer them at the front end, we'll knock off a X amount of percentage on your first bill if you do paperless billing. And so as much as we can, as much phone interaction that we have, somebody calls, we will offer that as a, hop over to the paperless billing, because the billing process for that is much simpler. It's much cheaper for us. And it's, the more people we can get to do that, the better.
And I think it just might help soften if we have to do a rate increase to do that at the same time, just to kind of give them a little bit.
Well, I mean, it may even be, if at this point next year, let's say Casey's Disposal is still having, it can support a 5% request, they can certainly do that. But if on our end of things, our postage has gone down to a certain degree where, we don't have to pass all of that increase on, then that's just going to put us in a better position.
Okay, on to item number 5. Here's staff presentation regarding the 2022 quarterly budget review for quarter 3.
All right.
Good to hear.
Appreciate your patience with putting this together. Being absent a finance director has kind of made these wheels churn a little bit slower, but we're pretty confident in these numbers. We're working with a CPA who we've worked with throughout the year just to make sure our bank reconciliations are all straight. But essentially what this is we do this every quarter, look back at the current year and see where things are shaking out from a revenue and expenditure perspective, largely focused on the general fund, and then we provide updates for the other funds after that. So looking at the first 3 quarters of the general fund review, where I could, I should say, I did include notes for October, because we do have some October data that we can report on. So it's a little bit more than a third quarter report. Property taxes, this is including both regular property taxes and delinquent property taxes. This is reporting on our internal budget, not the state budget, which has different variables in there that doesn't make it extremely useful for tracking purposes. But we budget assuming it's 97% collection rate on property taxes. We have so far exceeded that. So this is we've collected more than 97% of where we've thought we would be for property taxes. So property taxes, not a whole lot to report there, other than the fact that they come in at a steady clip. There's not been a large interruption in property tax payments from the county side of things. For sales taxes, again, this is reporting through September, what the graph is showing. So we're currently at 90% of what we thought of total budgeted amount for sales taxes. So that includes the city sales tax, the city use tax, the county sales tax, and the county use tax. At this point in the year, we're at 74% of what our budget or our audited final is. So we are ahead of that metric. A lot of that is in use taxes. We had originally adopted $250,000 estimate for city use taxes. Right now we're at $319,000, and that's through October. So that's less 2 additional months of data. So use taxes really, if they're a little bit harder to get a handle on, because they're a little bit more erratic. They don't follow trend lines as easy as traditional use taxes, but they have been coming in pretty strongly. So from a sales tax perspective, we're performing pretty well in sales taxes. it's kind of hanging out there that there's, some kind of economic downturn. They've been talking about that for the last year and maybe and forecasting out for the next 16 months or so. So obviously we're going to be keeping an eye on it. We did not budget overly aggressive in terms of sales tax collection, assuming that we're going to have another record year of sales tax collection in 2023. So I think we've done a good hand of keeping a even keel in those estimates, which is good from my perspective because I like us to exceed our budget in the revenue side of things and not fall short of them. On the franchise tax side of things, we're really performing, a little bit ahead of where we are at typically. We updated our estimates before the end of the year, about $5,000 or $10,000. So we'll probably hit that. We'll end up at between $510,000, $520,000 for franchise taxes. So these are the fees that utility companies pay the city. They're a percentage of their gross revenue for use of the right of way. So we had a lot of right of way discussion earlier. But franchise fees, they're pretty predictable. They're coming in higher than what we had thought because their franchise fees have gone up as well. Gaming revenue, it's obviously 2020 was rough, but 2021 and 2022 is really starting to rebound. The January through October total was 355,000, which is a little bit higher than what's reported through on the graph right there. So I don't have any concerns that we're not going to meet that 405,000. We updated the revenue estimate to 437,000 when we did the budget for next year. We might fall a little bit short of that, but not to some significant degree that's going to throw us off in any major capacity. Really, the short story for gaming revenue is it's starting to it's going to level out, and it looks like it's going to start performing what it had been in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Now, court fines, though. Now, court fines, there's a lot of variables that go into predicting court fines, so you can't really get a handle on it. The easiest thing for us to do from a budgeting standpoint is just to assign a 5-year average to it, and we are wildly outperforming that 5-year average in court fines. We are at 104% of what we had currently budgeted for the year, reporting through September. We are still down a part-time court clerk, but this kind of activity is the reason that we requested that part-time assistance in the court area, because that is a big caseload that also has an effect on the revenue or on the expenditure side of things. But that's significant activity in the courtroom that it produces revenues for us, but it's a lot of staff time to manage that. So we definitely need to work on and refocus on filling that part-time position after losing our part-time deputy court clerk earlier this year.
Before you leave that,
Mm-hmm.
would that be indicative of twofold as an increase in crime as well as an increase in prosecuting those crimes?
I mean, Chief might have better comments on that. I don't know if it's indicative as an increase in crime, but maybe just an increase in, there might be more police officers on the street. They might be younger police officers who are, a little bit more aggressive in their citations. It might be just people's ability to pay. They had some.
We think, Chief?
Yeah. First of all, payments.
Yeah.
We can write all the tickets you want, but you have more warrants than you have payments. You just have people in jail, and you're paying for that.
Right.
So it really correlates. I mean, there's statements made in the past that, well, we had this few officers. Well, that doesn't really necessarily correlate to the amount of citations we had to write, because the calls for service have only gone up. Even if you have 5 less officers, it's still, you got to go answer those calls. And anything to do with municipal court is charged by the city with a notice to appear. Okay, so we don't get warrants for those people and that sort of thing. So they're given a ticket to go. It either has a fine or you appear in court and be fined. Right. The rare thing is we put people in jail in municipal court. So there's some sort of fine payment structure in there. There's a collection service that goes with it. Something we started 2009, 2008 somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's more efficient now. The offset program is a part of it. So there's a number of factors that actually go into it. But has crime increased? Yeah. Since May of COVID year, suddenly the gates opened up and it's been just a different world for us. And are we out there? We have a lot more traffic engagements. So, traffic equals fines.
Mm-hmm.
Fines don't equal payments. Fines are your outstanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, does that somewhat even up? It never does. But it's just one of those things. Was there a construction zone? In 2007,
they were building 435. And if you go way back there, you look at this big spike in the payments. Well, they were double the fine every time. And then you can do other arrangements to make those payments as well. So they were really high fines. But was there more tickets written? Just don't remember, but it was one of those spike years. So is this really correlate to more tickets, more cases? Yes. But does it, more people paying? Fortunately, yes, collections offsets those things. So the system is working at least in this piece of it. This merely offsets that budget, by the way. That doesn't, staff time, prosecutor, the judge, all these things that go into the court, that just offsets the revenue, or the expenditure that you have.
I think and we're seeing it, some other places are seeing it too, is during 2020 and COVID and some of those things, people's ability to pay, or because they weren't coming to court, they weren't being seen, they were kind of, some of that's starting to catch up, right? So it could be a ticket from 2020.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And they've now paid it, whatever, right? So, or they were on a payment plan. So sometimes it's that lag. I'm not saying that's all of it, but I think because we weren't having, court, right? There physically wasn't having court. So cases were getting deferred, delayed. They may have been getting dismissed. I mean, I don't know all the nature, but I think if you look at our court today, if you go over there at court day, it's a pretty active place. Some of that, again, is driven by activity, but some of it is people are coming in and they want to make a payment plan arrangement that they can't do at the court window, right? We always try to encourage people to take care of business before court day, but no matter how hard you try to communicate, it doesn't happen. So I think, as the chief said, I think it's probably a number of things, but I do think there is a portion of it that is left over from the court system basically being closed during COVID. And now as they've reopened, some old business is probably getting taken care of.
Which will,
I wouldn't expect that. I mean, our history has not shown that that's what's going to happen.
right.
But on the long term, that average, I mean, we adopted 400,000 and that's been thereabouts. And we've had years where we thought we'd get 465 or 505, and the next year it'd be 375. And so
Yeah.
I think we've seen as much up and down when you look at year-end totals. It's a hard predictor.
Do we have the ability for folks to pay online?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Do we incentivize that at all? When you're talking about how there's so many people in activity and there's so much work for the judge and the prosecutor and the clerk, do we incentivize that where I know there's court fees?
Yeah.
Maybe do we have any leeway there? That someone could save $20?
By the time it gets to the
We're
point
not
where they're
seeing-
paying, the work's already been done. Quite. So there's no, I mean, that might be an area we can explore, but the input from a staff timing perspective and a paperwork perspective, by the time they've got a ticket that they're paying, that work's been done. There's not really.
The prosecutor and the judge haven't done anything at that point, have they?
Well, no, but they're on.
That depends on it, but
Yeah. I mean, it's
I was
not
just thinking, even as a resident, like, not that I hang out in court much,
a.
but for someone who's taking off work maybe and needs to get to work and pay their ticket, if we have so much backup, I was just thinking if we could do anything to incentivize that being a smoother process, a quicker process.
They're given all kinds of notes. It's on the citation. All those opportunities are there.
Yeah.
The folks who are coming to court are mandatory, one. Number two, want a payment plan. In some cases, they have to come to court. But the court clerk in our system has a lot of latitude to deal with this stuff. And I'm speaking from, we have a part-time clerk at the police department who fills in for that. So we get payments there. And so they don't have to come back with if the clerk is gone. And so we do all of these things to get that. There is a fee, but that's not a fee that the city wants to incur when somebody pays online. But the folks who are coming to the court primarily want they want some sort of plan. They are mandatory to be there, or they just don't understand. Now, there's a language barrier in some of these things, so they just don't really comprehend maybe the system until they get in there, and then they're accommodated language-wise while they're in the court.
Yeah, the incentive really is of paying online is you don't have to go to court, is you don't have to take the day and however many hours it takes to get down there, figure out it right, and talk to the judge. And the incentive is skipping that process and just getting it taken care of.
And it sounds like they can come down even.
Oh yeah,
before
beforehand.
court.
If you have a fine associated and you're not mandatory to appear, you're a speeding ticket, for example, that's an infraction, then you can pay that online anytime you want to before your court date, or you can come down and pay it, either credit card or in cash, and anytime before that date. Some folks don't realize that or trying to get the cash together at the last minute and then want to come pay at the court, and then they find a line out the door, and it's just something that happens. But we tell them, I'm here in the parking lot, and I tell them, hey, if you're just here to pay, here's the online, it's right on the back of your ticket, just pay it like that. But there is a fee, whether you pay it credit card here or pay it online, there is a fee associated that the vendor charges.
Credit card fee.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on court? Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
Ambulance fees still down, but we have caught up to some degree. We reported on that earlier, and we did, I did some review on seeing if some of that money coming in, if we were missing it somewhere. I couldn't really determine that we were. I think a lot of it was just the timing of the revenue. And I also think that our budget, our estimated revenue line item for this particular line item might have been a bit overstated. There was a couple years you'll see in 2018, 2017 that kind of set our average high. And then 2019, 2020, it kind of lowered it a little bit. And I think we're getting to that point right now. Reporting through October, we've got 150,000. This reports through September. We had a significant increase in revenue on the EMS side of things in October that buoyed that far line. So I think what we're seeing now is really a stabilization of, maybe the expectation for EMS is in that $160,000 to $170,000 mark versus $185,000 to $200,000 mark, where we ended up in 2017 and 18. So I've got less of a concern on the EMS side of things as I did earlier in the year, partly because we were able to just kind of determine that we're not missing money. It's just an issue of when it was coming in and when it was hitting our books. And then again, maybe resetting that at average and our expectations as far as how that line item is going to perform.
Would note we did, Chief, we did implement a new billing provider. So which one had a little lower cost structure to it. And they've been, I think, helpful in helping us get better connected with the various insurance companies, right? So we have to have contracts with those companies for payments, et cetera. So I think that there are some things, but that we think in the future will probably help that a little bit too.
Yeah, probably just streamline the process.
Yeah, there were some, just the way the payments were coming through and what we had to do, just sometimes delayed the processing and getting it to the right place. So I think the changes that we proposed and implemented will help in the collection system. Again, kind of like our earlier discussion, right? We want to try to streamline it. We want to try to encourage people to, pay their bills as effortlessly as possible.
Let's see, motor vehicle taxes. So not a whole lot of variability built into this either. These are estimates that we kind of get from other sources. We tend to overperform in this area. No real big reduction in that. We're a little bit ahead of where we typically are at this point in the year. I expect that our October collections put us over 153,000. So we're already over where we estimated being at for this particular line item. So really nothing to report on the motor vehicle taxes. From an overall general fund revenue standpoint, we are at 98.6%. This is through October. 98.6% of the revenue that we thought we would collect before the end of the year has already been collected with 2 months to go. So we're ahead pretty significantly, largely buoyed by those really strong sales taxes and court revenue. So I don't really have any consternation about hitting our revenue benchmarks for the year. We're continuing to perform strong. Now, on the general fund expenses side of things, that's where, we talk about, there's revenue side of things sometimes have a correlating expenditure side of things. So to your point about crime, when crime is up, fees to the jail that we have to pay are up, which is what we're experiencing in this year. We are 6% over where we typically are at this point of the year, with a couple of important caveats. Obviously, we didn't count on 9% increase in inflation from year to year, and fuel costs have gone up, and there is $150,000 worth of facility work both in this building and at the community center that we had the capacity to do them because of the responsible budgeting decisions that this body makes, but they were nonetheless unexpected expenditures that hit us earlier in this year. So we're continuing to monitor it. I don't think that 6%. Obviously, I would like us to be hitting our average and even a little bit below. 2021 pulled our average down some. I can't recall why that percentage of expenditures related to the rest of the year was lower in 2021 than it was in the other years, but that does pull the average down some. Typically, you're 75% of the year, you figure you're 75% into your budget. We've just got some of these other inflationary and unexpected costs that we experienced this year that are, pushing that number up. There's not really a whole lot of surprises left in the last 3 months of the year. I mean, knock on wood. But I think we'll probably end up, if we typically end up 2 to 3% above our budgeted expenditure line item, or estimated expenditures at the end of the year. I imagine we'll probably land somewhere around there, maybe around that 4.5%. But 4.5% in the current market, I'll take what I can get, I guess. I think the department heads have done a really good job of keeping a tight leash on where they can in areas of materials and fuel where they don't really have any option but to pay what we have, buy what we have to buy in order to do their job. That's where we're getting the hit in the wallet.
Are those columns this time, that should be actual in the second column, budget in the third column?
It should be, yes, sorry. The budget is the third column. Yes. No, you're right. Budget isn't, the budget is, and the, no, I take it back. No. That's incorrect. The actual column was our audited final. So that's where we ended up at that point in the year. For fiscal year 2017, we ended up at 5.5 million. The second column is where we're at 3 months or 3 quarters into the year. So budget is really just that's probably a misnomer. The budget is that should say quarter 1 through quarter 3 actual. Thank you for pointing that out.
I was trying to figure out, I get where you get the 88%.
So our other funds, debt service fund, still not showing any expenses. Our debt payments have been posted to the state. They just haven't hit our books yet. So those will get reflected in the next time we report on that. So those will hit in December. Really nothing out of the ordinary in the debt service fund that needs to be discussed. It's performing exactly as it's supposed to be. Special sales tax fund, we will have, and I've got a slide down here that's talking about that. Sales taxes are up, which is good. One thing that did happen is that in our special sales tax fund for 2022, we had a lease payment in there that was budgeted for a fire vehicle that was actually paid off last year. So we had some capacity in there that ended up helping us out because we always play around with sources of our expenditures when it comes to our major street project, and special sales tax fund is you explicitly use that for street projects. So we will have a budget amendment for special sales tax for the Swartz Road project, but not as large as one because we do have a little bit of extra capacity because that lease was actually paid off for our last year. Special highway fund, related to the last comment, we will have expenditures out of there. We do have some expenditures out of there, just not seeing it. They're not above 50,000 at this point, but it will have. We had budgeted 200,000 for capital projects out of the special highway fund. The Swartz Road project is going to be, once that kind of all shakes out, it'll be 250,000. So we will have a budget amendment to account for that. But again, the fund is healthy enough that I don't have any concerns with that. Other than the Swartz Road project, there's not a whole lot of activity in the special highway fund. Economic development, really the only change at this one is that we've moved more of our, we build in revenue assuming that there might be some origination fees if a project comes. If they don't hit, then they don't hit. We build in, service charges and legal fees on the expenditure side of things in case stuff comes up. But really the only items that we know that we're going to pay out of the Economic Development Fund are our membership to the Wyandotte County Economic Development Council, and then we've started to charge more of our costs related to our local chamber involvement out of the Economic Development Fund rather than the general fund. So it's a little bit higher than what it typically is, but it's still not going to meet our $66,000 expenditure level. Solid Waste Fund. So this report is current from a revenue side of things as of last week. We can get pretty real time data as it comes to our utility billing. So through the first, that's performing well. And again, with Casey Disposal not incurring they could have incurred an increase or introduced an increase to their rates to us in June. They didn't do it until July or until October. So our expenditures are they're keeping track with how we thought they would perform. But we will have a budget amendment recommended for this fund to incorporate those additional charges for those last 3 months of the year, which we will offset probably with the transfer from the sewer fund as discussed earlier, probably in that 12 to 13,000. Again, we're going to see how November closes out before we make a decision. But that's a conversation that we had in April, so it shouldn't be a surprise. Sewer fund continues to perform strongly. There might be some, I think I did incorporate some, but there was some, I was concerned that it looked like we were missing some payments related to our treatment contract, but I ended up finding those and looking at the details. So that's captures pretty much all of our expenses up through most of October, actually. So it continues to perform well from a revenue standpoint and from an expenditure standpoint. We kind of inflate the expenditure level or expenditure authority in that fund in case we have major emergency events that we need to pay for. Nothing major to the point so far has caused us to where we think we're going to need to adjust that fund. So sewer continues to perform.
Before we move from sewer, just for FYI, so if you remember, we have a contract for our wholesale treatment. It was a 5-year with 2 10-year extensions to that if the parties agree. So we're ending that 5 years, so we're having some discussions. For the most part, not really any significant changes contractually. Obviously, they're proposing some rate increases. We haven't, through the whole 5 years, there was none. Basically, they wanted to, but we have a provision that there has to be a rate study. That rate study's been completed, and we're kind of looking at that. So the contract itself, pretty straightforward. There's a couple items that, we'll probably have some discussions around. I don't see anything significant. Rates, they're asking for, I would say outrageous rate, but we're probably 10 to 13%, which again, they haven't been adjusted in 5 years. Some setting of rates going forward, which is not necessarily a bad thing if we know what they're going to be. So when they do a rate study, they look forward and say, we're going to have these capital costs operating, pretty much like we do in business. So we're just in those discussions right now. So it will impact, though. I mean, the fund is solid, and so on, but there's potentially some adjustments, customer adjustments, which we haven't done in a couple of years on that side. We did make some early adjustments, assuming there would be some increases. So we may not have to do much on that revenue side, the customer side. But anyway, we're at that period of time. We don't really anticipate there to be a new contract. So if it's just a renewal, it's pretty much kind of an administrative part to that part of it. Rates are different. Rates are separate. The contract says there'll be rates. And then there's a rate ordinance separate. So just bring you all up to date on that. But again, at this point, we've had an initial meeting. There wasn't anything that was just, let's rewrite the whole thing and start over, and it's going to be, big problem. It's just, I'd say 90% of it was, quite honestly, typos that were in the first agreement, or somebody wants to add a word, and you're like, okay. Flow rates instead of rates, as an example. Okay. That was pretty easy. So, anyway.
I will note too, out of the sewer fund, while we're still on it, that we still have the $182,000 transfer from sewer to debt that still needs to hit. So that will be an expense that's not reflected on this chart, but will be reflected before the end of the year. And that's it's part of our regular debt payment structure. So it's not
Sewer pays its own debt.
correct.
So it's not paying any debt but the debt directly related to bonds issued for the sewer system. But those bonds are issued as GO bonds, but we know exactly how much of those bonds are attached to sewer, and then that transfer each year is dollar for dollar to the cost of the bonds associated with sewer.
So for budget amendments, I touched on earlier, the two funds that we're looking that we need to amend will be the special highway, and that will be to incorporate allowing for the additional cost for the Swartz Road project, bumping that up from 245 to 270, and then solid waste, which is really just allowing for the adjustments that are occurring this year already with the October increases from Casey Disposal. But other than that, I think this is the least amount of budget amendments we've had for 2 or 3 years. This will be part of the December 12th city council meeting. We'll have a public hearing related to the budget amendments because these are budgeted funds. But that's what's going to be noticed. That's what it's looking like we're going to need to adjust it to.
When we approved the Swartz Road project, was that up to $270,000?
Well, so we're spending some of the fund balance. So the total amount was, I think 424,000 was the total contract. There was about 59,000 that was cemetery related. That's out of that. And then the rest of it was what we approved. So there was an original contract. We did an addendum to do the extra work. And so about 250,000 of the bill is coming from special streets, and 115 out of the special sales tax. So special sales tax, we budgeted 100,000, and in streets we had budgeted 200,000 for street improvements in general. But yeah, so we had brought that before to the
So this isn't a new item, it's just
Yeah.
where it's coming from.
Yeah,
Essentially,
And we're effectively, we're spending down some of the fund balance in the special highway fund, because we had projects where we, hadn't spent money, and so there was some buildup in the fund, and I mean, fundamentally, you want to keep a balance, right? The reason we don't have to do a lot of budget amendments, because we keep some fund balance in there, but for the most part, you want to spend your special highway money, you want to spend it, right? You want to spend it on roads, so spending down some of that balance is exactly what we should be doing, spending on streets.
Yeah, whenever we budget for street improvement projects, they come from a couple different sources, the two major ones being the special highway fund and then the special sales tax fund. And typically what we do is we just, at the beginning, we just went through it in budget adoption. We'll put $100,000 budgeted as a special sales tax, and then we'll put somewhere around $200,000 budgeted as a special streets. That's kind of our baseline of we're going to spend at least $300,000 in street projects. And then once we actually go through the process of going out for bid and select the project and getting all the specs, and we have a firm grasp on what that cost will be, now's the time of year is like, okay, where's all of it? How does that all fit together? And who's paying what? And do we need to adjust it here or there? And do we have capacity here and there? So that's kind of par for course for street projects.
And sometimes, like on 102nd Street, when we did those projects 2 years ago, we had bonded funds that we had put aside specifically for roads that were eligible, and 102nd one. Swartz was not one of those that was named when we did the bond. But again, we have the funds. It's just slight budget amendments. So again, the law. There's two parts to the law. One, you got to have money on hand, right? And number two, the budget law says you can't spend more than what you authorized in your budget, even if you had 5 times the amount of revenue. It's not revenue based, it's all expenditure based. So to some respects, I'll say, I just think the whole process sometimes doesn't make sense. I mean, if funds are there, you're not overspending, and it's a local decision. This is the process that the state gives us.
And I don't think neither of these funds are property tax funded, so they don't affect the levies the property tax levies that go through. They're all through different funding sources.
But we're not doing anything with it tonight.
No. I'm just here's, as a precursor to our December 12th public hearing, this is what we're going to be presenting.
Oh.
So that's where we're at so far. I expected to, as we get tightened up with our working on bank recons, some of this will get firmed up some. I'm not expecting any significant changes in what's been presented so far, but largely I think the departments are doing a good job keeping a handle on their budgets with respect to the rest of the market and materials cost, and revenues just continue to come in, as expected or stronger, which is good.
I have one budgety question, I guess it would be, and that's something that I've heard in conversations, not as much pertaining to Edwardsville, but other cities, and it could be with Edwardsville, is when we have open positions. So we have at least 3 open positions right now, and all those positions have been funded in our budget.
Mm-hmm.
And that money seems to kind of just disperse throughout, or maybe it stays in the general fund.
So the overall budget assumes that we're at full capacity staffing level, and all those people are getting paid every 2 weeks. So whenever they're not getting filled, then we incur savings because we're not paying somebody to do it. So this year we did have a couple of we've had pretty significant, I'd say significant, consistent turnover in pretty much all of our departments. So we'll have savings. I'm going to couch it as savings, but we don't want to save in this area. We want to pay the people to do the jobs that we want, that we need to get done. But we did have savings in those personnel areas. This year, some of those savings are just kind of eaten up by some of the other costs that we're coming into contact with. $150,000 on facilities, $20,000 over in fuel costs the first 9 months out of the year for fire, and it's just a matter of bidding expenses offsetting some of the savings that we had by not having staff being filled.
I wondered if, because there are other revenues that are higher as well, which is really beneficial and helpful, but would it be possible to have the savings, instead of just being absorbed and kind of disappearing, when we don't have a staff position filled, we would still pay that into almost like a savings or an account. So, and then besides overtime, I know overtime would have to cover some of those spots, but that way at the end of the year, there's money left over for budget. So if we're low somewhere and we need to pull from that for equipment or something along those lines, it's money that was budgeted that wasn't used that now we have available for a need getting ready for the next year, or in hindsight for that year.
And effectively that's what happened.
Yeah.
Without probably that structure now. We can show what that offset is. We could run the pay. This is what we saved. Because I'm not sure we've ever had a year that I've been here that we had 100, that we were fully staffed for full 12 months. I don't think it ever happens. It just is the nature of any business, right? But we can show what that is and kind of what that relates to. But yeah, is it offsetting the cost of fuel or offsetting some other thing? Yes. Now, if all other things worked exactly right, that excess would go to the general fund balance. Or
Right.
if it was in the sewer fund, but we don't have one person in the sewer fund that's funded out of there. So it would effectively grow your fund balance if all other things were equal, which again, never quite happens, right? It's a budget. But
Sure. Well, I think that would be maybe just a good exercise for 2023, like
Mhm.
in planning ahead and just see how it works out. And that way it might be a good resource for us. And if we have to use it for overages, if it's not made up for somewhere else, I just think that would be a great, not only transparency and accountability, but also maybe a great resource so that there's a pool of money at the end of the year that would be used toward if a department needs something. I know we've need a truck in parks before, something along those lines, that it would just be a little bit easier, I think, to allocate that money and say, hey, we've saved that.
Well, within the general fund, I think what you're describing, like the city manager just said, it is happening. It's just not as strict. There's no mechanism making it happen because it all exists within the general fund. Because we don't want to move money from the general fund to say the special street fund to make up costs for Swartz Road or whatever, because we want that to be paid for by special street, highway funds and other sources, not funds, property tax funds saved because we're not paying somebody, a staff member who's not there. So I think I understand what you're saying in that capturing those costs that aren't being paid through budgeted personnel that aren't being filled. And to Mike's point, I think we can do that pretty easily to show here's total payroll, here's what we saved by not having, a public works director for 2 months or not having an office administrator for a month and a half, and kind of show where that is being offset on the back end of things.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Just for, I mean, not that for next year.
Sure.
And then, of course, any overtime that we had to pay, like if there's a police officer that we're short and we have to hold somebody over, I know that has to move.
Yeah,
But
and the other thing comes into play, so when we budget, I say, we're gonna hire, since our public works director, probably one of our newest hires, right? So when we budget, we make some assumptions, right? We assume they're gonna get paid some point, right? And they're gonna take the following benefits. But when we hire them, sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it may be more in the pay, which health plan. So we tend to budget worst case scenario, right? We assume the person we're gonna hire is gonna come in here, gonna have a family, and we're gonna put in the highest insurance costs, right? That's just kind of what we do. Because we'd rather not be on the side where, oh no, we're over, we could be spending $10,000 on health insurance, or we could be spending $20,000 on health insurance. I'd rather budget 20 and come in at 10 than vice versa. So a little bit of that can be hard, but you're right. And in some departments, if I take the fire department, the challenge there is we only staff effectively to the minimum, right? We could run on 4, but that's not what we run. We have a five per shift. So when somebody's out, we have to backfill that spot, which is automatically agreed. So police department, there's a little more flexibility. Sometimes I can pull somebody in for 2 hours early, somebody can stay 2 hours late, kind of cover it. Public works, a little bit of flexibility there. Admin, it's just, okay, well, we just, everybody else is trying to pick up the slack, right? And so, we can put the numbers together and give some idea, but it's not so clean as to say, here's this, we didn't pay this person, here's the savings, and 100% of it's going to go over here for some of the reasons you said, right? Because how do I determine what overtime was directly related to that? Some places it just,
So in your scenario,
yeah.
$100,000 is sitting there on November 1st. Do we have to have council authorization for it to be spent? What mechanism are you proposing for handling that separate account? Because that could put some real strains, like if the roof leaks and you need that 150,000 now, and it's sitting over there, and do they have to have a council vote to move that funds out into, so they can use it? And where now, you just have this budget and you work within it, and you realize sometimes you're higher over here, sometimes you're higher over here, you're low over here, you're lower over here, and you manage the entire budget, as opposed to as you would in your home budget. You get a little extra, you set it aside, and maybe a vacation or whatever. But my concern is we set that money aside and then we start bickering over where in the world that money is going to go.
I could see that being more of an issue if that was the only money that we had. And so right now we have usually close to $1,900,000 in our general fund. If we have an emergency that can't come out of that, I think we're in a much bigger concern. Most issues don't need $100,000 immediate.
20,000 or 5,000.
If it's 20, then we've had requests, I think just last year, and it might have been 2 years ago, that parks needed a truck, for example, or off-road vehicles, something like that. We're okay, well, where does that money come from? I think for the community, from like the residents' feedback that I've heard when it comes to budgetary issues. If we have, oh, well, we save the money right here, it's already set aside in this account. It's not making our general fund lower. It's a savings from this year. It's an easier pill to swallow. It's kind of like you would do your home savings. Hey, in June, we were under budget. We saved $300, so we can set it aside for a need that we might have down the road. I just think it shows more accountability and transparency within our budget instead of it just being dissolved or dissipated throughout little other fees going higher throughout the year. When we're looking at the finance reports, several of the items are over 100% because things are higher this year.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't see where that relates to payroll and salaries. And those are the questions that I've gotten.
Sure, again, I think
just
we
bringing that
can
transparency is
look and give you an idea what that is. This mechanism, I'm not quite got a handle, but I think
Yeah.
we can say, hey, these are the, when somebody leaves, there's generally some amount of time before the new person's hired. But again, sometimes somebody leaves and they're making $15 an hour, now the market is $17 an hour.
Right. That was going to be my point.
That's a pretty common, right? I mean, you'd love to say, oh, well, we took this guy, now we're going to move to the bottom of the pay grade. And we focus on things like that about, hey, here's kind of our pay, the first, 1 to 4 steps is kind of our general starting pay and kind of where we're at in our overall pay plan. But again, sometimes we budget extra because we know that's, again, if it's a new position or if it's a vacant position at the time of budgeting.
Right.
That's where we tend to over budget for the position because we kind of look at worst case, right? So if I had a public works employee and when I prepare the budget, that position's vacant, I'm going to make the assumptions on all those benefit things that are going to be at the top end of the benefit cycle, right? And
Yeah, it's the moving target kind of aspect of it in that I'll take the public works director for an example. When we passed the budget in 2020, at the end of 2021 for 2022, we assumed that our previous public works director would be here for 12 months at the same level of insurance and coverage that he had established and following the same rate of pay adjustments that the rest of the city. Whenever that position becomes vacant, we might have a 2-month period where we're saving because we're not paying it out, but we bring in a new person who's now at a different rate, either from a benefit perspective or a pay perspective. And so it's not as apples to apples as some of the other line items because it's a lot of this variability based on who we hire, at what time we hire, and some of their other, insurance benefit type needs. But I do think I understand your point as far as capturing those costs from capturing those costs of what would have been paid out from budget adoption to whatever point in the future that weren't.
Right,
And so
that
to
is
just
the difference.
to show I could
And I would say this, you see more larger cities, right? They'll say, well, we're going to keep 30 positions open, and the value of those 30 positions is hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's how we're going to, quote, make our budget get balanced. We just don't have that capacity, right? And so when we can't say, well, let's hold back 4 positions, for 6 months. Now, sometimes, as we do in the budget, we'll say, we're going to, for this year, to kind of help make it work, we're going to plan to hire somebody in July. Now, we'll start the process earlier. Then we only budget them for 6 months. We don't assume they're there for 12 months if we think we're going to hire them in mid-year. So
Right.
We do some of that in the budget.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I've noticed that. That's
Probably
really
spent too much time on that.
Yeah,
But I
sorry
think we
for
got
the
what, and we can kind of prepare a report of what that looks like.
Sure.
Even for 2022 when it's done. Right?
Yeah, I think it might be a good tool for the departments later on. Zach,
Anyways.
did you have anything else?
No.
Okay. Item number 6, consider cancellation of the December 26, 2022 city council meeting.
Make a motion, we cancel December 26, 2022 meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Bishop,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Merry Christmas.
Item number
We
7.
wouldn't have been here on the 26th anyway, it would have been the 27th, but.
Oh, yeah.
Because, it
Oh.
pushes, because the holiday's the 26th, the council meeting moves to the next day, but
It's on a
but
Sunday.
technically the 26th is the date in our code. So
Okay. City manager report.
I have nothing further to add. I'll answer any questions.
Write that down.
Put that date on the calendar.
Zach, did you have anything for us today?
Just to remind everybody, December 6th, we'll have, and I'm sure you'll get to it too, the mayor's tree lighting ceremony will kick off at 6. We'll do the Ho-Ho Express setting out from here. We'll hit the neighborhood. We've added the Castle Park subdivision. We're going to swing by that after we go through Edge Hill. That'll culminate here around 7, where we'll do we'll have words from the mayor, and then we'll have a performance from the Edwardsville choir. We're working to see if we can't secure the high school band or drumline folks to kind of walk us over to the community center. But starting this week, you'll start seeing the decorations go up from our Parks and Public Works guys. So it should be a fun event.
Miss Dion, did you have anything for us? Chief Matthews?
We had a personnel call for service, was bit by a dog, and his finger was hurt pretty bad. Be off for several weeks.
Hmm.
It's one of our more significant events. That was gonna be neat.
Not his trigger finger, is it?
No, it was a trigger.
Ooh. That's bad for business.
Without provocation. So that's one of the worries of the job.
Chief Whittam?
I did contact Spectrum. I've gone through 2 people who no longer work for them. So I did finally get a contact today that I've got an email into, so we'll see where it goes.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully in the process. Maybe we'll see a line fixed here in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
We'll see.
That's the wires on.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Councilman Scott?
Zach, good job. Great job as always on the 2 presentations today. Tons of information, so appreciate you staying on top of that. Chief, well, I bet you're looking forward to the ambulance. I see that it's you've got it commented here that it's currently in production. Do you have a delivery date?
Early January, should be in Columbia for some last installs, probably February, March time.
Yeah. Now, will that be a replacement or will that be an addition?
That'll be a replacement.
Okay. I also like to publicly congratulate and recognize our mayor for her hard work and going above and beyond for what she's done. And you couldn't have said it better with your opening comments from the public, so I appreciate that. But her and the mayor from Bonner Springs went to the meetings, unified government, and with their hard work and their effort, continuing effort, was able to get $2.6 million of ARPA funds for our city and for Bonner Springs. And yes, the projects would have to be ARPA approved, but just the thought of being able to get the 2.6 to our 2 cities is incredible. And even though it's a small amount of money compared to what was out there available to KCK, we wouldn't have got any of it if it wouldn't have been for the efforts of our mayor. So I definitely appreciate what you do and what you do for Edwardsville. So thank you. That's all I got.
Councilman Adams?
In addition to that, I agree, but I would also like to thank Chuck Stites and Tom Burrows,
There you go.
because I think without the entire team, it would not have happened. And so I'm really excited about Commissioner Stites' election and what he's doing on the commission. He's doing exactly what I thought he would. I thought he'd be a bulldog, and I thought he would fight for the west end of Wyandotte County, and he certainly is. I greatly commend him for that, and I commend Tom Burrows for his assistance in that and for coming along. And the report I got from Mr. Stites was that more and more commissioners are starting to understand there is a western end to the county and that it needs some attention and that our citizens are just as valuable on the west end as the citizens on the east end. And so I do appreciate all four of your efforts in that manner. Are we getting a new cell tower in town?
Yeah, there's one that got approved at off Call Drive by, I think, I'm trying to remember the address of it. I think it's 10.
Yeah, there's the one right over here.
Yeah,
But-
that vacant field
Right.
there next to the Spindle Works, Woodworks, yes.
I went up 102nd week or so ago, and there was a car sitting there with a gentleman in it with an Illinois license plate, and he had a clipboard in his hand, was taking notes, and I stopped and I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I'm working on a cell tower on this end of town." And I thought, well, that's kind of weird.
I haven't heard anything of that
Um,
one.
Yeah.
Which went through the process, bunch of
Yeah.
permits.
So I just, and I, at the time I thought, well, that's kind of suspicious, but it looked official enough with him. And I just don't know if they're doing some preliminary.
They haven't reached out to us. That's
Okay.
what I know.
All right.
If they're doing something other than the one that went through the planning process and SUP process before, I think.
Chief Whittam, I was at a gathering a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lady there who couldn't say enough about the fire department and the EMS in a situation that involved the death in the home. And she was so complimentary. She also complimented the police as well, but she was very complimentary of the EMS people that came in and assisted her. And she just was raving about the service that you provided. I thank you for holding such high standards for our community and the service to our citizens. And I also with Chief Mathis, this is just happy day here. I noticed the Shawnee finally decided to do ticketing system like we've had for 5 years. That's there again, we're out in front of everything, and I appreciate that. I appreciate our chief's leadership and excellence in the department they had. So thank you very much.
It's kind of interesting to look back. We have a whole crew of people who've never written a handwritten ticket. There was a time when they didn't want to write electronic tickets, right? So we've kind of gone through that era. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad they're coming on board because it's sort of efficient.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your leadership. That's all I have.
Councilman Bishop?
Just one thing. Some people in the room don't know it. Tom Cooley sat on the commission for years, and he was a real good friend of mine, and he was a good friend of Tiny's in our city, and he passed away last week. Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
He fought the hard fight though. So
He was our first city administrator in Edwardsville.
Both here and Bonner.
yeah. That's it.
Councilman Shriver?
I too would like to thank our mayor and commissioners for all their hard work. I can only imagine how many hours and hours and hours the mayor puts in behind the scenes in order for our city to receive the money we received. Otherwise, we wouldn't have received anything. And all the other extra things that our mayor does, the mobile pantry, numerous things that consume hours and hours of our time. So thank you so much. Zach, I have a couple of questions about Casey disposal. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. No, just a couple of quick questions. When they came in and gave a bid a couple years ago, did they include the mobile or the
I'd have to look and see how I do think that
I thought that would have been cheaper.
when we went out to bid, if I'm remembering correctly, at the end of 2020, what we did was we had them bid on the service as it is now, and then also bid on it if it were to include the mobile home park. If I recall right, that did reduce their rates some. In my conversations with the mobile home park, now they've had probably 3 regime changes since that amount of time. But they were not interested in participating in the city's citywide contract. But it is a good point in that that's the most, south of K32 is our most dense population base as far as proximity to each other, and that the mobile home park is a big part of that. But they were not interested in
Do you reach
joining
out to
this.
them each year? Or, I mean, I know we have a contract, but
I did reach out to them whenever I reached out to them at the contract time, and I believe I reached out to them when they had one of their other regime changes, but at that time they had just started a new contract with Honey Creek Disposal, I want to say. So I don't know
so
how
they
long.
don't participate in our book.
They have a different vendor and a different service schedule and different rates, and I'm not exactly sure their billing structure, but it's different than the city. They are currently counted as a commercial account, and ours is a residential service. Now, we could, realistically count them as a residential service, but the way it's been previously is they're their own commercial account, and they prefer to be that way. And previous councils have not really been interested in compelling them to make a change.
I just wonder if their service does the extras that Casey Disposal does, if it would be worth.
I don't think they've got they do not have recycling. They don't have
their
recycling.
representatives and saying, hey, join us for all of this. So.
That was our pitch in 2020 was, we can get you recycling and all that, and they've, but
We can reach back out.
sure, yeah.
It'd be a win-win for everybody.
Mhm.
So
I don't
just
know where
wondered
they're
if you
at in
did.
their contract with they just started with Honey Creek within the last year, I know. So I don't know how easy or not easy it would be for them to get out of that, but we do
Okay.
keep them in mind whenever we do look at that.
Okay, perfect. Thank
Mhm.
you. And I know we've mentioned it several, I think each person up here has mentioned our special sales tax is going to be on the horizon. So I know.
Yes. I think right after first of the year, we're gonna be because we really probably, those elections are held on uniform election dates.
Right.
Which is now August and November. And we really should put that on, I believe, on the August 2023 election cycle. And there's a series of pieces that have to be in place.
Right.
So we really should focus
Timing
right
wise.
after the first of the year to get that, back up. I think we need to have some discussions, not necessarily if the rate needs to change, but whether or how it's allocated or what it includes. If we want to
When
continue.
it changed, right.
Right. Because that would be the time to do it. I mean, you could increase or decrease, but I mean, I don't think we would. I mean, basically it's a half cent, right? And some places will do a series of quarters or half cents. We elected to do just a single. Taxpayer doesn't really change, but just
Right.
one and segment it, leave some flexibility in it. And at the time, if you remember, we went out a couple of times more specific, and those didn't get necessarily the support that
Right.
an all-inclusive one received. I think part of that is we had a pretty active group that did that. Former Mayor Hines Rogers really took a lead on that group, as I recall, and was really out there educating the public on why it's good. Now we've got roughly 10 years of history, and we can certainly show we wouldn't have the fire department we have. We wouldn't have some
Right.
departments. We certainly wouldn't have the road improvements. We didn't have that sales tax.
Like to encourage Zach
Yeah.
too to add that on.
Right.
Much as you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot to add on or a lot to
We put
advertise.
he's been putting out a little story.
Oh, yes.
Here's your sales tax, that sales tax, here's this truck.
Absolutely.
Here's, like we just said, we just paid off that 3-hour fire truck. That's $300,000 or so.
Right.
Over 8, took 8 years to pay for it.
Yeah, the
Over 7 years.
Yeah.
from a advocacy perspective, though, we as staff do have to make sure that we are not advocating for people. We're not telling people you should go out and vote for a sales tax extension.
No,
What we need to do illegally, all we can do is say, this is what the sales tax has done for us,
Correct.
and this is what we've been able to do with it. And we got to kind of skirt that line. But
Right.
now, citizen groups can go out and advocate for as much as they want, and we certainly hope that they do. But that's why the outreach that we have has been more of a, did you know that the sales tax did this
So
and it
people
paid
what
for
it's,
that?
right.
Correct. Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
We literally just could, I mean,
No,
a lot of the
I,
improvements people see, we would not have been, I mean, not and reduce the property tax rate.
right. We know, we're up here.
Yeah, I know.
90% of the city doesn't realize what's
That's part of the
benefited this city through that. So, no, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
Councilman Noah?
Agree. On the, I wanted to know how well that large item pickup went, what it cost, and considering it was that rainy Saturday or Friday, whenever that was.
I don't have the cost right off. The cost is built into what they charge us. So other than the dumpster days, that's got its own cost because they've got rentals and all that. We've got a certain fee for the 40 yard, but I can ask if they can pull out their cost that they had, but it's built into our rate. We did have a couple, addresses and that were missed, and maybe one or two street sections that were missed, but not to the degree that we had with our previous vendor. And I believe that whenever we heard about that and communicated any of the misses to Casey Disposal, that they were remedied pretty quickly.
I just didn't know how well it was received, and maybe we could consider changing the date on that. Maybe we could have a little better weather than.
Yeah, I'll see what I can
A little
do.
bit late in the season
Uh-huh.
because as I remember it, I thought, I'm not putting anything out in this rain.
But the sofas were really heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we
anyway.
did have misses, it tended to be where something was waterlogged and they just couldn't get, and they came back
Yeah,
later.
And
And
then talking, it's hard to find the money in those couches. Also on the trash increase, I wonder if it would be a good idea to kind of inform the public somewhat that is kind of coming through the hot shots. And I mean, it's going to be hard to swallow 5% all of a sudden. And I don't think that they realize that it's been going up and we've been covering the cost for them since then. So some kind of ease them into that expense just a little bit.
we'll definitely have another kind of hard copy mailer newsletter that we do at the beginning of the year that we'll make sure to mention that, and then have it be consistent, when we do any kind of outreach,
Because,
making sure it's not.
anytime you do that increase, you're going to get a lot of complaints.
Oh,
about
yeah.
that. I wanted to also thank the mayor for her work on securing the extra money for us. And I think that was really a super good thing in Chuck Stites and Tom Burrows. Now we need to, as a council, I think we need to have some pretty definite information on where and how we can spend that money. So we can start kind of thinking about that, because we might have ideas individually and they might come up that, no, you can't spend it there, or we need it here. And, maybe there's some convincing that'll have to be done between us or something. That's a pretty big responsibility to take care of that kind of money. So I think we've discussed that anyway. I was not here last week. Don't wrestle with 8-year-olds when you're 71 years old. They hurt you. Congratulations on 15 years with Edwardsville. Definite asset to Edwardsville. The last thing I was going to mention, Tom Cooley also, he was the first city administrator in Edwardsville. It was run pretty much by Phyllis Freeman, and Tom Cooley came in and we sent him off to KU, and he got his degree to be a city manager, and Bonner Springs took him away from us. And when the UG was invented, he became the first commissioner representing us on the UG commission. So I wanted to make sure that he was recognized on that. The last thing I want to do is congratulate and thank all the city staff for their handling of the budget. I think that as a group, you guys do probably about the best there is in the state of Kansas as far as handling of the budget. So thank you for that. And
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it short. Right of way, I mentioned this before, when we're mowing right of ways, I know we have multiple contracts that come out and we don't need to open a discussion on it tonight, but I was hoping we could look at, of the right of ways that we mow, so we are either paying our employees to mow or we're contracting out, how many of those are right of ways are owned by the city versus how many are owned outside of the city that maybe we're paying for to mow. Just to make sure that we're not having tax dollars pay for private or outside owned right of ways or private parcels, some of which might be on the north end, and that those are getting billed to those owners that we're not.
Are you talking about when we have to go do a lot mow?
Not necessarily, even our regular mowing contracts. I was just hoping to clarify if all of those are properties that are owned by the city or if we're paying to have private property owned or private property mowed. Sorry.
I don't believe that any of the right-of-way area, we'll pull that, I could provide that, but I don't believe any of the right-of-way areas that their contractors or our city staff mode are privately owned.
Okay. And would that include like the Lake of the Forest property on 110? So we don't mow that?
Well, we mow along that right of way up to the tree line, but I mean, that's roughly the right of way line. I mean, there may be a little bit of that where we're cutting back in. I mean, we could cut less, but I mean, I think we're trying to keep that clean there. I don't think there's much there. Now we have, and so there's a couple of lots that the city, like we have one over on 98th Street and Steel, that it's the city's lot, that small lot. Now we have had a number more this year of lot mows where, because of the enforcement, code enforcement,
Okay.
and then we've gone in and mowed those. We in those cases, we have to give them the notice that they don't do it, then we mow it. We then have to send them an invoice. They have 30 days to pay the invoice. If they don't pay the invoice, then we place that as a special, basically it's called specials on the tax roll. And then obviously it's subject to them paying the taxes. And if not, then, that would trigger them potentially going to a tax sale. It's treated just like a tax.
Sure. In that I think is the right way to do it. I just wondered if maybe sometime while it's not mowing season, like over the winter, if we could just maybe have a presentation or just a really brief summary of what, since we changed our mowing up and what's contracted and what we do, like what's being mowed by the city, kind of like the trash conversation, just to make sure that the people paying their taxes aren't paying, like mowing their yard and then paying for somebody else's private property to be mowed.
Yeah, and again, technically, right, every person is responsible to the edge of the road.
Yes.
Right. But what you have is on some of the places where you have, some people do some, and you've got right of ways and you just want to keep it clean. And then we have by policy, right? So our ordinance says you have to mow to the edge of the road, but by policy, roughly the council, but we've said, okay, we're going to mow, for example, 110th Street, or these areas we're contracting out, and we're generally mowing from a pass behind the sidewalk, if there's a sidewalk there, right, out to the curb. Now, there may still be some land from there that's quote right of way or part of somebody's yard that we won't mow. So we have some of that, but we can bring back a map showing exactly the areas that we're mowing that are under our contract, and which properties we're mowing by city crews. And then again, if it's an intersection, we'll kind of put that on a higher priority.
Yeah.
Right, is to mow the four corners of an intersection because we want to make sure there's visibility for accident reduction, make sure you see the stop signs. Sometimes people, some people mow, they got there and they mow, and the person across the street will mow and, stop at the edge of the yard. I mean, we have one property owner, they do that and they don't mow it at all, and we've cited them and we mowed them and we've, put it on the tax rate. So
right.
Sometimes it's an enforcement action, but we can also give a report on which ones this past year that we've had to do force mows and how many.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, it's not urgent, but sometime over the winter, I think, while it's not mowing.
Sometime first quarter.
Yeah, that would be great. Then a quick update. I thank you everybody for the kind words, and Mr. Parker, the council. The ARPA funds was a really big deal. We've been struggling with that for a long time. Really nutshell summary is the county got $32 million for the county, not the UG. The city, KCK got their own money, and every city did. the county had 32 million. We got a call Thursday around 4 that meeting was on the agenda for that night, and the plan going in was all 32 million would be allocated that evening to entities all in Kansas City, Kansas, non-for-profits in Kansas City, Kansas, with $0 going to Edwardsville or Bonner. Mayor Garner agreed to give Mayor Harrington and I a platform at the meeting if we were able to show up to kind of make a plea to the commission, and Commissioner Stice and Commissioner Burrows really stepped up and advocated for our city there and for Bonner Springs as well. But I did want to take an opportunity, because I asked so many in the community to please email and call their commissioners. And so I wanted to take an opportunity and say thank you to all of the community members and the council members that reached out and talked to the commissioners and the mayor and anyone who would listen and say, hey, we're here. Please pay attention to us and invest in our part of the community. So thank you, and hopefully everybody had a great Thanksgiving. I think it was a great time to just be thankful for our staff and city here, and all the work that goes into making our city and community great. Quick reminder for Mayor's Christmas tree lighting, December 6th. Hopefully everybody can make it. We'd love to see you there. Have a great evening.
I'm not sure what it was. I know that he was in hospice for a little bit, and then he just got better. He went home, so he died at home.
He doesn't still live in Illinois.
No, he lived over off of, I think it's off of Parallel over there somewhere. I don't know what his address was, but it was over there somewhere.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
He was. I didn't know where he lived. I really didn't know he was that sick until about 2 months ago. Tiny and him was
Yeah.
really close. He was a cool guy.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, it was.
He gave me some advice about well, we used to hang out together now. Every once in a while, I said, hey, Tom, I'm going to run for city council. Edwardsville, you got any advice? Yeah, go.
You know what he told me? He said every city needs 2 leads. So they need an arson and an assassin. I got to agree with that. I think you learned that at KU. Hey, how about them Wildcats? Did you watch that game? If it hadn't have been raining, I'd have been scared. I think KU would have had it for
Well,
them.
they beat themselves.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
definitely worth keeping an eye on, though.
Would have been a tighter game.
If it had been good weather.
I'm with you.
That's a pretty lousy excuse. You got to be able to play in all kinds of weather.
Yeah, them sissies canceled, moved the game in Buffalo. Come
Oh,
on,
that's,
play in
they
Stone.
got to play 2 games in the same
Yeah.
game. That's like 2 home games.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's good to see you. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
Got a question.